Coming together.
सर वॉइस क्या करेंगे सर?
Disha. It is my privilege to invite Sriram Desigan sir, Chief Coordinator, to deliver the welcome address and set the tone for today's proceedings.
Good evening. It's very nice to see you all. A warm evening. So I just want to invoke, just want to take a Bharatiya's poem to welcome you all. He says, Olipadaitha Kandinai, va va va, Urdikonda Nenjinai, va va va, Kalipadaitha Mudiyinai, va va va, Kadmaikonda Thodinai, va va va. So, meaning, Ilaya Bharadatinai, va va va. He says this is for the young Indians. He is asking, he is welcoming the young Indians to take charge, to lead the nation, to lead the society, to lead the world. So with what this kind of qualities, with the vision, with the strength, strong shoulders, strong heart. So we also welcome you all to take charge of this nation. Sirimai kondu ponguvaai. Sirimai kondu ponguvaai. Sirimai kondu ponguvaai. Elimai kandi ranguvaai. All this is saying. So we want you to develop these kind of qualities, and now we invite you all for this great lecture by Dr. Matheswaran ji. So I invite Dr. Matheswaran for this wonderful evening. So we are all very keen, very waiting to hear to you, sir. I invite Dr. Ramohan, our academic committee member, and Ramohan, our director. So there are our guiding lights. So we invite you all for this great evening, good evening. So I hope you will all enjoy the session and will get benefited most out of it. So pay keen attention and take notes, whatever the things, whatever, how much ever you can grasp from it, that will be beneficial for you because we have got a person with extensive knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for your warm and motivating words. Next, I invite Sri Sundra Pandian, sir, Principal for Chinmaya Academy for Civil Service, to introduce our esteemed speaker.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to introduce our sir, R. Marshal Dr. Matheswaran sir. Before that, I want to tell few points about the topic. This is a evergreen topic. Since we started, that is me started the civil services examination, it is the topic. How Iran nuclear issue. Now also you might have studied in the paper, nuclear issue. It has not yet been solved. Similarly, now also in India also, this is the major topic. When you go to the interview, on that day, it may come in the newspaper. They will be asking about this. You cannot prepare on the day, particular day. It happened to the students already. Students who went to interview struggled to discuss about the nuclear security and strategy at the international level. Okay, also in the state level. So our sir has accepted to give this guest lecture for us. So I thank sir and the motivation given by our director sir, Damodaran sir, and our other academic committee members. So they only motivated to arrange the lectures like this to benefit the students. Okay, so we have done this. So here our sir, Air Marshal Dr. Matheswaran sir is a renowned expert in the strategy, aerospace and technology. He has 39 years experience as an officer of Indian Air Force. So he knows very well about this. Next, he attended the John Kennedy School of Governance, Harvard University. He has made yeoman contribution in the vital post of Deputy Chief of Integrated Defense Staff. He has extensive experience in operations, aerospace technology, aerospace development, and flight testing, defense research and strategy, project management, experience in important projects such as LCA and Kaveri. He is a renowned strategic analyst in national and international levels. Presently, he is a president of Peninsula Foundation, which is an independent, non-profit, non-partisan public policy research think tank. So I also thank the students for giving the cooperation. Ultimately, you will get certain idea about nuclear security and strategy, which will help you to clear UPSC as well as a Tnpsc group 1 level examination. Thank you. Thank you.
Important one. Think tanks which great idea, which you input to the rural administration. Most of these institute think tanks are all north of India. We go to the print of Dr. Matheswaran. He has started a think tank called Peninsula Foundation, stationed in Chennai. He invites thoughts and the ideas from all over the world. He was last week with very remarkable persons. I share the honor with him. I have been with a batchmate in PhDs in strategic studies. So that's a credit to me. So I look forward and I want all of you to actively participate. It is not a dumb session. This is a strategic session. So all of you participate with all your eyes and ears open. Ask questions. Don't leave him unanswered. Pursue him. You will get the benefit with that.
Thank you, sir. Now I request Sri Damodaran sir, Director of Chinmaya Academy for Civil Service, to provide opening.
I know Chinmaya Academy. Questions to our suffering king, Ramoji, and Marshal Dr. Matheswaran, who has kindly consented to give the guest lecture. Sorry for my throat, just recovered from throat infection. He's a great strategic thinker, as Ramaji pointed out. Is running the Peninsula Foundation in Chennai. which gives a lot of strategic ideas to government of India and also technocrats who want to get into that sector. As you are all aware, our country has had skirmishes with the neighbors. Just about 12 years, 13 years back, when we had a problem with China. And Dr. Manmohan Singh ji was the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister. And it used to be told in the rumors, I don't know how far it is right, but in those days, the people used to say that our chiefs of the different chiefs, that the Air Force, Army, and the Navy chiefs told the Honorable Prime Minister that you can't fight a war more than a week because we are unprepared, we don't have much of arms and ammunition. From that kind of a situation now, our country has progressed. And the Operation Sindoor was a great demonstration or a display of our capability. The indigenous arms, the protective cover, what about the S-400s which were imported from Russia? The indigenous protective umbrella that was created by our defense laboratories and private sector was remarkable. Also, as a, like you read current affairs, I used to read the newspapers when Manohar Parrikar was the defense minister. One of the industrialists went and told him that he has developed one equipment which he wanted to test in India. All the laboratories declined. He wanted to take it to US and have it tested, but they were not giving him no objection certificate for taking it abroad. Within 24 hours, he gave him permission to take the equipment abroad and test. He got it tested, got a good certificate, and it has been inducted in many countries and also in India. But afterwards, Parikar also opened Indian laboratories for testing by any private sector. A lot of encouragement has come, and in the drone sectors and others. In fact, one of the drone, what I learned about the drone was from Peninsula Foundation's guest lecture. I think 1 or 2 years back. It was a very nice session. And today you find that drones have done a wonderful job in operations in the. So why this lecture? Recently, I believe, last month, I think, when the army chief from Pakistan went to US, he attended a dinner, and in US he declared, and he threatened India that we are a great nuclear nation, we will bomb and take half the global population down. He was directly telling India that please be careful, we can kill you all, or at least 50%. So like that you are saying. And what atrocity. So the things of the geopolitics has been changing. For the last 20 years, after independence or after the Second World War, there were two camps. One the NATO, the other one is the Russian USSR camp. USSR broke into pieces, and the Cold War came to an end. And the US became the sole single policeman of the world. Then slowly India started aligning with them. We were getting closer. And USA, which never liked communism, but communism was banned in US. But then whom do they support? Not a democratic nation like India. They support the largest communist country in the world. And they gave them technology, and we gave them economic power. Today, that is the second largest global power of the US. And now such a country is they have created a Frankenstein, and they thought they would counter Frankenstein by creating Quad. So the quadrilateral. They said that the earlier days of the Anglo-Saxon partnerships, that is USA, Australia, and UK, together they joined with the Oriental Square Power, Japan, and they thought they would bring in India also. So things were moving towards that until Trump happened. And with Trump, with the way things are happening, nobody knows what to predict. Maybe at the simple time, I would say that he looks at USA versus the rest of the world. Maybe every country is against him. Everything is advantage USA. That is what he thinks. And then our advantage or the progress which we were making with them has diminished. So suddenly, from a earlier geopolitical point of view, where India was moving closer to US and USA was moving away from Pakistan, today we find that Pakistan is once again best friend, the most favored nation of USA, and we have become the most unfavored nation. Why? Who has the highest tariff for imports in the world in US? India, 50%. No one else. So Pakistan most favored, and we are the most unfavored, and they have a nuclear power. And the way the Israel husband told the Hamas leadership in Qatar, Saudi Arabia rushed and signed an agreement with Pakistan. Now Pakistan says we will give you Saudi Arabia. They say that we will give you nuclear bomb. We will give you nuclear technology. So the things are changing dramatically, and US is wanting a naval base or a army base in Bangladesh, which everybody says US was instrumental in replacing the government in Bangladesh. If that is true, I think they would be very shortly getting a foothold in Bangladesh. So with this kind of a scenario, where do we stand? And where we, with India's progress with Operation Sindoor, we may be in a better position to fight the conventional war. But if it comes to the nuclear side, what we have to do, we don't know. So what we can do as an academy, we can only look at the experts in the field who was associated with the nuclear command. Dr. Matheswaran, we requested him to come and give you a lecture. Please listen to him and get your clarity. Thank you. Over.
That can say, it gives the information that all must have said longer. In international level, there's no permanent friend or permanent enemy. There are only permanent interests. But what the other guy is proving to us today. So,
Thank you, sir, for your valuable insight. We are now honored to have Air Marshal Sri Matheswaran sir with us. He will deliver his lecture and he will be sharing his valuable insights and experience with us. Let us all listen attentively and benefit from his wisdom.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, thank you, and Mr. Desikan and Mr. Damodaran, thank you for the introduction. Dr. Ram Mohan is also a co-founder of the Peninsula Foundation and a long-term friend. Fortunate to have him as a friend for a long time, and a great support system for the Peninsula Foundation. I must acknowledge that. Okay. Uh, it's a great pleasure to be here, and this topic, particularly for you all, aspiring civil servants, will move in to govern the country in the future, hopefully, many of you. And so I'll keep it simple and I'll give you an overview. Most welcome to ask questions, even in between if any doubts are there, right? And I'll bring a focus more on Iran, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, right? So that's going to be of, uh, you know, instead of going too deep and too complicated. Okay. Well, in the context of what Mr. Damodaran said, in 98, when we did our nuclear test, there was an interview done with Stephen Cohen. So, okay, yeah. So Stephen Cohen, who passed away last year, if I'm right, and a long-term India hand, and he was in Brookings, and he was interviewed and asked. One of the questions was if India and Pakistan did for nuclear tests, but if partition had not happened, and if India, the whole subcontinent was one country, how would America have dealt with it? And he said America would have been sitting with China and trying to deal with this huge country. And it wouldn't have been very good for India to face China and America together. Okay, so in these developments, it is inevitable that, like you said, there are strategic partnerships take place at different times in history based on the environment and strategic necessities of each country, right? So nuclear dimension is an extremely important development that happened in the post 1945 world. How do I know this? Okay. Come here and do it. That happened here. Hmm? Yeah, okay. So let's ask the first question. Why do we need it? Nuclear weapons. Move to the next one. I think I'd rather handle it myself. I don't like this somebody else doing it for me. Can I take this?
Right.
Yeah. Just flip. And I'll do it there already. This one? Can you remove the top thing? Yeah, keep it at the bottom. Yeah, okay. You shouldn't be covering something there. If you can minimize it a little bit. Okay. It's not happening.
It's like India America friendship going up and down.
Give me the laptop.
It is sharing.
Hmm? Can I operate there?
No, sir, it is sharing.
Share on this. Okay. Okay, fine. Okay. Okay, let's see. The nuclear age starts with, are you all aware of this? How many of you have seen the Oppenheimer movie? Right? Okay, the Trinity test, July 6, 1945. Okay, and the atomic age begins with that. And one of the descriptions that Bernard Brody mentions is that from now on, until now, the militaries were the main primary job was to fight and win wars. And from now on, their job will be to prevent wars. That's the way he actually explains. So the history of international politics since 1945 is also largely influenced by nuclear politics. And as nuclear weapons, as Adam Smith says, invisible hand, the nuclear weapons play a role to regulate behavior. It brings in constraints and shapes preferences while remaining largely invisible. Most countries don't have it anyway, right? But they still get influenced by this impact. So, what are the aspects that we should be looking at? So, in terms of understanding the role of nuclear weapons, they permit diplomatic exchanges from military deployments to alliance management to technological cooperation and impact on trade and economic integration as well as international finance. It is reconfigured the relationship between military power and international influence. In short, nuclear capabilities influence statecraft, right? And in the context of security, it is about survival. If you understand and if you ask that question, why did we go nuclear? The finger will point at China. Why did Pakistan go nuclear? It will point at us. And what does the nuclear weapons do? It guarantees survival of that particular state. There is a red line that comes in, kicks in immediately. And then you can have any number of conflicts, but that red line will keep staring in your face and you can't go beyond that. Right? And just to flag that issue, that is why Asim Munir or Musharraf in earlier days will keep doing the nuclear saber rattling. Right? They're not fools. They know what they're doing. Right? And why would a state want to go nuclear? Simply because it fears an existential threat should a war break out. And it doesn't trust anybody else as a reliable ally to provide the support when necessary. Okay? That applies to every country. Some of them may choose to be an ally. But the latest example, Iran, when we study that, you will understand that. What when. But also, why so few countries go nuclear? Not everybody can, right? Resources. And more importantly, ever since we understand the international system and the great power politics, this is one area that's been controlled extremely well and make sure that the great powers don't want any more competitors to come and compete with them. Okay, so it's been made extremely slow. And if there is a big country like India that is determined to go nuclear, nobody can stop it, but you can delay it. That's what has happened, right? And in terms of states, 2/3 of the states which are not threatened by nuclear weapons, really speaking, they're too small or middle powers and smaller powers, and they don't want it as well. But they're also very weak and unprotected should they want to take a chance to stand up against a powerful country who's a nuclear armed country. They won't do it. But a country, even a small country with the backing of a major power like the US, Israel, they decided to go nuclear simply because it does, even Israel doesn't trust the US for its survivability. Right? That's the reason. So there is a lot of conspiracy theories that keep floating around these days. There's quite a bit of an element of truth in it as well. John F. Kennedy's assassination, because he was vehemently opposed to Israel going nuclear, and he wanted to open it out and remove it completely. And since he was opposed, they say Mossad had a major role in his assassination as well. There are about 16 countries who are on the nuclear trajectory, which includes Iran may go nuclear in a time, and Indonesia is another candidate. Some of these countries with big populations can go, but we have 9 countries who are nuclear weapon states effectively right now. Okay. Please read a paper by Kenneth Watts, who wrote that in 1981. And he says, more may be better. To understand the international system and 21st century or late 20th century international system and 21st century international system, why more may be better is a nice paper to read. Not everyone will agree, but there's a logic in it. Okay. Okay. So why did nuclear weapons evolve? It's a natural progress of science, right? And as scientific temper through enlightenment, Europe and US flourished with scientific temper. It was inevitable at some point of time you break through in these areas. Do you all remember reading the first 3 in school days? Atomic theory, Dalton, Rutherford, and Niels Bohr, right? Okay, so go back and brush up your knowledge on them. That was the link on. Okay. 1933-34, Leo Szilard is the first guy who conceptualized or not, who brought out the idea that you can't split an atom. That goes against Dalton's original formulation. Okay. So he patents his idea and gives it to the British Admiralty. And that gets followed up by German. He's a physicist, and there are two chemists, Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann. In 1938-39, they actually do the fission. The nuclear uranium atom is bombarded with neutrons, and they see that it gives out, it changes. It doesn't remain uranium anymore, it becomes barium because it's lost some electrons, right? And they do that again. In 1939, they positively confirm that fission, when you split an atom, nuclear fission takes place, it releases a lot of energy, and therefore the potential now is there for nuclear energy, right? It could also be used for weapons. So what happens? Immediately, and that's the time of Nazi party in power, Germany is rearming, and therefore Einstein and Slizard now, and there's lots of them, lots of these scientists are all trooping out to the US because of the Nazi environment. But they also write to President Roosevelt, who just taken over, that the Germans are working feverishly. German scientists, there's no doubts and ambiguity at all about the fact that the Germans were far ahead of the Americans and the British during the Second World War, prior to the Second World War and during the Second World War, in terms of research. Right? And therefore, if they develop an atom bomb, that's the end of the world, in their opinion. So they alert the US. And straight away they get on to the Manhattan Project. I'm sure those of you who've seen the movie would have understood how it all happened. It's pretty well-made movie. By 1941, they set up the project. They do the first nuclear reactor in a Chicago University in a football field. And then they go ahead and do the experiment. Trinity happens in La Alamos, New Mexico. And a fission device then becomes the two bombs over Hiroshima and Nagasaki on August 6th and August 9th. How many have got killed? 150,000 and 240,000 people. Okay. So what are the important? There's a race that gets on because the war is over. The reason why did the US drop those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki? What's the understanding?
The Japanese attacked on a little Honolulu, mainly
Pearl Harbor.
Papua, yes.
Okay.
Even the Germany surrendered, but Japanese were only one to assist their Swiss powers.
So go and drop atom bomb on the civilians. Deal with the military.
So it was so Japan was so small, but US has larger power. But how a small country can tackle US
When you study, leave the emotional pickings. Correct? That's a simple, average emotional way of reading things. That's not the way things happen in the world, right? Anyone? Very often, the Americans continue to even today argue, saying that the atom bombs were necessary to end the war. Have you all heard that? To reduce more lives being lost. You've killed 400,000 people, almost 390,000 people, right? But they say the losses would have been more. How credible is that? And what's the real reason? Go back to the letter that Einstein and Slizard wrote and then link it up. Why would US behave in that way they did? What's that? How would you interpret? No? The World War is over, right? The British Empire has collapsed. They were completely debt-ridden to the US, and they continued paying back the debt right as late as 2008 or 2006, the second older debt, right? The British empires collapsed because of financial insolvency ultimately. Strategic overstretch and financial insolvency. British Empire collapsed. Right. So at the end of the Second World War, the whole of Europe was demolished. The Soviets lost a lot of manpower, phenomenal destruction, but they were a massive country and an ideology that was strong, and they will bounce back. And Stalin was a very strong leader, right? And therefore, now it was an ideological conflict that was emerging after the Second World War. The US was came out of the Second World War making more money. The US has always made more money out of every war. It doesn't matter if they lost the wars, but they've always become richer after every war, right? And they were unscathed in the Second World War. Okay, they might have lost manpower who fought in Europe and Asia elsewhere, but the mainland America was unscathed. Okay, nothing was affected there, and the industrial production was phenomenal. So today, at the end of the Second World War in 1945, there were a very strong economic and technological power and a political power. And the whole of Europe depended on American largesse to rebuild themselves. That's one. But the challenge was the emerging challenge of a massive military machine in the USSR, right? And an ideological conflict. So the US wanted to send a clear message to the rest of the world who has the most advanced weapons that nobody else has, and don't take a chance with us, right? That's one. Second, both the Russians or the Soviets and the Americans were racing to occupy Japan. And they had to beat the Americans to occupy Japan. And that's the second reason. Third is, although they've done the Trinity test, they want the proof of the pudding. And Western way of war doesn't, despite all the humanitarian concerns and claims, they've killed more people than anybody in the history. So they would want to demonstrate that as well. So that's a demonstration that happened there. Okay, it's a very hardcore classical realism that's in play. Okay, and that is why they dropped. The Japanese had already lost the war; they were defeated, and it was only a matter of time. The normal conventional forces could have gone and occupied Japan. The loss of life would have been much lesser. Okay, so the logic that the Americans gave, a lot of American scholars have now researched that and they've brought back articles and have agreed that. Okay, so Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened on 6th and 9th of August, is a defining moment in terms of military power demonstration and in terms of power projection as well. Okay, and this is what is going to characterize the emerging Cold War over the next 50 years, or rest of the world, or of the 20th century as well. Having seen the destruction, the UN, which is very young, just created in 1945 straight away in January, they said we should abolish the nuclear weapons. Right? Without the Security Council agreeing to it, that wasn't going to happen. But the others followed quickly because nobody can live with one single nuclear weapon state dominating and imposing their hegemony on everybody. So the USSR quickly exploded their nuclear weapon in 1949. The UK, that's an interesting story. When the Manhattan Project was created, initially a lot of research was done in UK. As the Germans were doing, so were the British. But now the Americans, British, and the Canadians all got together. We will put all our, since war is happening in Europe, they said let the experiment take place in the US, and US will be in charge of it. So they all gave their research results to the US, saying that the US will share the final results back with the UK and France. That didn't happen. US refused to share the results with them. So there's a lot of espionage things that happened within those friends as well. And UK was the first to follow on the Western side in 1952, because you can't be, the unwritten norm that emerged over the next 3 decades is that you have to be a nuclear weapon state to be a permanent member, an effective permanent member in the Security Council. Okay, so the UK was not going to stop. Now with France, UK went nuclear in 1952. And then the Americans followed up with a hydrogen bomb in 1952, the same year, a few months later. In 54, the Americans did the massive thermonuclear weapon test called GRA test, 17 megatons. How much is a megaton? What is the yield of Hiroshima and Nagasaki weapons? What do you understand by those kilotons and megatons term? What is TNT? Trinitro? Okay, what is that? Explosives, right? So when they say Hiroshima, the bomb that was dropped was about 9 kilotons. What does that mean to you? You should know this. Simple. 9 kilotons or 9,000 tons of TNT. If you had dropped explosives that contain 9,000 tons of TNT, that is the damage this bomb will create. Right? Similarly, Nagasaki was 14 or 16 kilotons. That is 14,000. Right? But imagine a 17 megaton. 1 megaton is 1,000 kilotons. Right? So 17 megatons is 17,000 kilotons of, okay. So that goes into lakhs of tons of TNT equivalent, right? So that is they test that in the Pacific Ocean. And in 1960, France goes nuclear. And then in 1961, the largest nuclear test that was done till today is by USSR, and that is 58 megatons. Okay, and they did it north of short of Arctic. They did it in the northern USSR, and you can imagine the massive impact it would have had. But it was an atmospheric test, and therefore it also proved something known as the electromagnetic pulse impact. What is an electromagnetic pulse impact that you'll have? If somebody drops a bomb over Chennai and it explodes at, let's say, 15,000 feet altitude, okay, even a smaller bomb like the Hiroshima one, 9 kilotons, and if it explodes at 10,000 feet, what will happen? That's actually what happened in Hiroshima as well. That's what will happen. Everything will get burned, right? And second is the electromagnetic pulse will destroy your electricals completely. Okay, so it will just break off your radars, you'll break off your electricals completely, all your systems that work on hardened. So today, when people design for the military requirements, one of the requirements we impose is EMP hardening, electromagnetic pulse hardening. That means it should be able to survive some strong explosive uh, environment, which will generate a lot of magnetic pulse, right, to destroy that. Okay, so that was the 1961 test. And between 1961 and 63, how many of you know nuclear tests were done in space? No? You have Outer Space Treaty today, right? Which bans nuclear weapons in space. But these guys did that, both the Soviets and the Americans. They did about 10 odd tests in space between 1960 and 1963. In one of those tests, which the US did, it just blanked off the electricals of from New Zealand down to Southeast Asia, the entire Pacific islands and everything. Okay, got knocked off. Okay, so thereafter, both sides said this is true, and all the satellites that were now just about coming in, the beginning of satellite age and space age, they were all immobilized, and sure enough, they all said, okay, let's stop this, and we will. So they go into a partial test ban treaty, which I'll come to it later. But along with this, as the nuclear weapon capabilities are peaking, you had the Cuban crisis. We almost went to war, nuclear war. That's one of the occasions where the world was on the precipice of a nuclear war. Okay, it was well handled by Khrushchev and the Kennedy brothers, and they managed to pull it. There is a submarine that came very close, and he had lost communication with the Soviet mainland, and by their rules, now because the American ships were above him, and by their rules, beyond a certain stage, the captain, was well within his rights to launch a nuclear weapon. Well, this is not just one submarine; it is a group of 4 submarines. So the commander was insisting on launching, not the commander, the group commander, the political guy, And the commander of the submarine, he prevailed. He said, I'm not doing it. He surfaced. Then, of course, they took him as a prisoner. Now, that submarine is in San Diego. On the bay, it is there. People can go and see that. Okay. But that is the kind of a close situation we were in the given crisis. In 1964, China went nuclear. Mao Zedong, right from the beginning, called nuclear weapons as the paper tiger. But that paper tiger was required to ensure that China's survivability was guaranteed. So they didn't stop at anything. They went nuclear in 1964. Right? On 18th of May 1974, you all heard the term Buddha smiles, correct? We went nuclear. We did a lot of hoodwinking, calling it peaceful nuclear test. It is a nuclear weapon test, nuclear weapon test. That's it, right? So you proved your capability. And thereafter, we went to sleep for next 24 years. Okay. In 79, off the Cape of Good Hope, there was a nuclear test done. The flash was picked up. Now it is extremely well confirmed that Israel and South Africa collaborated. South Africa was an apartheid state, right? Both needed their guarantee. Israel is equally an apartheid state as well, right? And so in 79, they did a joint nuclear test. Israel today has about 200 nuclear weapons, including thermonuclear weapons for a small country. Okay. In May 1998, then we, pulled out our, reversed our stand. We went explicitly doing a nuclear test, declared ourselves a nuclear weapon state, and Pakistan followed immediately. And Pakistan actually went nuclear when? Anyone?
What the Gandhi was,
Kargil war was after this.
I mean,
That's 98. You're talking about this 98. Yeah, officially they exploded in 1998. But Pakistan went nuclear in 1989. There's a story behind that. I'll tell you that later. Okay, but that, just like what the Israelis and South Africans did, that test was done by the Chinese in Lucknow using their third test weapon design. North Korea went nuclear in 2006. So these are the developments of all countries that have gone nuclear explicitly, right? They all have nuclear weapons, and the world is very clear about that. But rest of the world kept fighting to get sense back into the people, saying that you must abolish nuclear weapons. It starts off with Bertrand Russell and Einstein's manifesto in 1955. And then different regions, different countries start working on. First thing to do was in 1959, the countries in the southern hemisphere say Antarctica should not be, no nuclear test should be happening. Where all were nuclear tests being done? You've heard Bikini Atoll, South Pacific, correct? Then you've heard of Sahara, the French did in Africa. The Soviets did in their own region. Chinese have done it in Lucknow. The Americans have done it in their region. But it was in atmosphere, it was in space, underground, and over the sea, right? And there's a lot of damage, environmental damage, radioactive damage. I mean, if anybody says it hasn't happened, it's utter nonsense. Because the area, regions surrounding, particularly in the Pacific, where both French and the Americans and the British have done their tests, they've damaged a lot of islands there. Okay, so Antarctica said this will be a nuclear test-free zone, and that came into effect in 1959. 1963, I told you about the space test, and therefore partial test ban treaty was enacted in 1963. And by 1967, this was followed by Outer Space Treaty, which explicitly bans weapons of mass destruction in space. Okay. And Latin America declared themselves a nuclear-free zone in 1967. And in the meantime, the Security Council members, the 5 permanent members, agree upon the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And they bring in the Non-Proliferation Treaty and force rest of the world to start signing up on the NPT. Now, quite obviously, India refuses to sign. And our nuclear development program goes back to 1947 itself. Homi Bhabha and Nehru are very clear about this. In a world where there's one dominant nuclear weapon state and others are racing up to catch up, we cannot be left wanting should the need arise. So they kept their options open, both for nuclear energy as well as the nuclear weapon capability. So second is, the argument was that it is unequal treaty. So you're shutting the door in 1968, saying anyone who's tested a nuclear weapon before 1968 will be recognized as a nuclear weapon state, and anyone who's not a nuclear weapon state will all be forever non-nuclear weapon states. Right. And now if somebody tries to do it like India was doing, sanctions and other problems will come on them. Okay, that is what was a warning given. So India, Israel, Pakistan, and one more country. North Korea, of course, and North Korea withdrew. They joined it. Okay. There's one more country which have refused to join into this NPT regime. But the pressure was building up from 1968 on NPT issues. Okay. In 1985, the South Pacific Nuclear Free Zone was declared, and along with that, Australia, New Zealand. But with the nuclear submarine AUKUS deal coming in, they probably will have to take a relook at it. A lot of physicians, the international physicians community is anti-nuclear. For their work, they were given a Nobel Prize in 1985. In 86, Israel's nuclear program, the world got to know. One of these guys who'd worked in the nuclear program within Israel, he escaped from Israel and then he revealed the program. And 2 years later, the Mossad had got hold of him, brought him back. He's in jail, even now in Israel. Okay. But the cat was out of the bag, right? So Israel is a nuclear weapon state. Everybody knows about that. Okay. In 86, USA and USSR. So now, from looking at nuclear weapons as a weapon of war, the US military was fully convinced that it was a weapon of war. They wanted to use it in the Korean War. They wanted to drop it on Vietnam. They wanted to drop it on a few other countries. Okay, but better sense prevailed with the political leadership. And therefore, and a lot of scholars like, Bernard Brody and Hemant Khan and all these people brought in a lot more sense into the whole process. And therefore, what you see is from 1945 or let's say 1949 onwards, when two major powers are nuclear weapon states, the nuclear doctrines, deterrence theories start maturing, start developing. And that's an indication when you now see the two sides saying that let's talk, because we have too many nuclear weapons, too much of a danger to the earth and humanity, and let's start talking about reducing things. Correct? That's when the talks start, 1986. By 1987, a treaty comes into existence called INF Treaty, Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, right? Because you had NATO in Europe, you had Warsaw Pact in Europe. Both sides are heavily armed with nuclear weapons. They placed their nuclear weapons there. And therefore, they said, first, to denuclearize, you can't do it completely, but first you can remove all these nuclear weapons that are in the range of 300 miles to 3,400 miles capability. So IRBM, the 3,400 come into what's known as intermediate range ballistic missile. And then you have other tactical nuclear weapons and others. So all that was eliminated by this treaty. And this treaty held strong for nearly 30 years or 20 years plus, right? So President Bush walked out of that treaty if I'm right, around 2003. So the treaty is now scrapped, and there is other treaties that have also been that have followed, which is called as START and SALT. They're also in limbo at the moment. So, but it's a very important treaty, brought in a lot of stability. At this point of time, the two powers alone had close to 60,000 nuclear weapons. And this began to bring in the number of nuclear weapons on either side. Okay. Rest of the world, post the Cold War ends in 1991. A lot more new developments come. There's a lot more pressure on NPT. The NPT extensions, they want to now make it permanent, and therefore there's a race to actually do something. So our nuclear explosion in 1998 is a consequence of that development that was going in towards making NPT UN recognized and then bring it compulsory for everybody. Right. So South Africa joins in NPT because that's the apartheid regime had fallen. Mandela had come in and he said whole of Africa should be nuclear free. Right. They're working on that. Southeast Asia declared itself nuclear free in 1995, and Africa in 1996. When the Soviet Union melted down, Russian Federation had the authority on nuclear weapons. The command and control is retained with Russia. But a lot of nuclear weapons were already existing and located in Ukraine, in Belarus, and some of the other former republics. All of them, the US and Russia talked to them and they denuclearized. Today, Ukraine is crying. They said we should have had, right? But Kazakhstan and Ukraine, which had the largest number of weapons outside of Russia, they all denuclearized and returned their weapons to be destroyed by Russia and the US subsequently. Okay, the total, what is known as the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, this was the trigger for our test in 98. This is open for signature. When a treaty draft opens up for signature, then if you get 50 members sign in it, they will define, it could be 50 or it could be a different number. Then the treaty kicks in, right? And then it becomes enforceable, right, by the UN. So this was the urgency. Arundhati Ghosh was our ambassador in Geneva, and she handled it extremely well. And we did our test in 98, as you will see subsequently. Ashok Pathsar, yes, that's okay. Now you need to understand the definitions of, in this context, what these terms mean. Strategy, as I've now explained, it's all about warfighting, or it's about deterrence. It's about theories, doctrines, and plans for the production, deployment, and use of nuclear weapons to achieve a political objective, right? Your political and military objective. Whether you actually use it or you indicate that you want to, that you will threaten to use it, is a different ballgame. That's a separate part, right? But that's the purpose. The objective is to align the capability of nuclear weapons with political ends and often as a means of deterrence and coercion. Okay, so that is, you need to understand, or you need to have a clear understanding of the meaning of deterrence and coercion as well. In the nuclear security, when you now talk about nuclear security, it's about addressing proliferation or safeguarding through formal means the nuclear mechanisms, materials, and capabilities and technologies. So it involves protecting nuclear and other radioactive materials from theft, sabotage, and other malicious acts. It includes measures to prevent terrorist attacks on nuclear facilities, the illicit trafficking of nuclear materials, and their potential use by non-state actors. Okay, so particularly with respect to Pakistan, when it went nuclear, the Americans had massive concerns on, with so many non-state actors having, I mean, the state had no control over them, Jaish-e-Mohammed, LET, etc. Could they become a threat to nuclear safety, correct? And therefore, there was a lot of discussions. So one of the things that come out in the Op Sindoor attack is that the Americans are worried because a significant part of it was in American control, as per some of the claims. How true it is, one doesn't know. But whatever it is, the Americans played a major role in ensuring and in talking with the Pakistanis to ensure that the nuclear material, nuclear capabilities, and the warheads are completely under the control of the military, and the chances of falling into the hands of non-state actors is as minimal as possible. So, but the worry is still there. Okay, in terms of proliferation from nuclear security, Abdul Khader, who was seen as the father of the Pakistani nuclear program, then the International Atomic Energy Agency, as well as the Americans, got on to him because he was proliferating the nuclear capability. If Pakistan had their delivery vehicles in terms of missiles and ballistic missiles, that technology came in from North Korea. And it is suspected that they traded their missile capability with nuclear weapon capability to North Korea. Right? So this is one of the suspicions. Right now, if Asim Munir has been sort of hosted by Trump, one of the reasons is that Pakistan doesn't provide access to a capability to Iran. Correct? They're trying to prevent that as well. Okay, so that is, so they're trying to bring in various aspects, including legal institutions, political measures, in aspect of nuclear security here. Proliferation is straightforward. So you have various mechanisms will and tools that the international system employs now to prevent fissile material, proliferation, technology proliferation, and components and centrifuge is the name you would have heard so often. Where does it come from? Everybody don't make their own centrifuges. Somebody is buying components, you assemble and put it across there, correct? The Germans are very well known in that. So all that is being tracked now. So what about strategies now? What are the various elements of the strategy that you need to understand? Okay, we've spoken about why nations go nuclear. You need to be assured of your survivability. You need guaranteed deterrence, correct? All that can take different forms. Okay, as the nuclear capabilities rise, and particularly when the US and Soviet Union were racing ahead with building more and more weapons, so the various concepts then started kicking in. One is the assured destruction. Assured destruction is both sides will launch, and no, either of them is not going to survive. So that is an assured destruction part, because each one is having what's known as the megaton missiles. On top of that, the another technology that emerged is MIRV. What is MIRV? Okay, multiple independently targeted re-entry vehicle. Okay, how does a ballistic missile path work? Where does it travel? Does it go into outer space or near space? The ballistic path goes through near space. Okay, or even depending on the range between Russia and the US, you're talking about half an hour of travel time. Okay, between India and Pakistan, it is less than 5 minutes. Okay, so your strategies will get governed differently. Okay, there a ballistic path. If I today you can pick up when a missile gets launched, you can locate where it's been launched from, and based on its initial path itself, you can now predict its complete ballistic path. And from that, you can predict where it's going to hit, where it's going to land. So a ballistic path is well known, correct? That is why this is followed by cruise missiles. Cruise missiles will not follow a ballistic path, but they'll fly along the earth and they can navigate. So for you to understand where it's going to come and hit is difficult. But to make things more complicated, they brought in what's known as the MIRV technology. So as the ballistic missile goes into the space and then it has to re-enter the atmosphere and go towards the target. Before the re-entry, the warhead splits. It carries about 10 warheads or even 12 warheads. And each of those warheads is programmed to go to a particular target. So they will now move in a different direction, right? And you will have 10 of them coming into you from one missile or 12 of them coming to you from one missile. Okay, so that is the MIRV capability. In today's world, China, Russia, and even the Americans have it, and we are also testing it. Is that you have a hypersonic missile, you have glide bombs. These don't have to follow ballistic path; they can actually navigate, avoid enemy defenses, and go to a target. Okay, so it's a very, very robust technology. The concept of second strike capability comes into the picture. What is the second strike capability?
What is it?
So if the enemy is hit you, first, you should be able to absorb that hit, survive, to be able to launch an attack back. That is second strike capability. So if a guy has launched a megaton weapon on you, not much is going to survive. So how will you have a second strike capability? Intelligence is there all the time, active. They may know where your silos are. Most of them are also mobile missiles. Okay, so you can keep moving on. Even then, your ability to do an immediate second strike may be seriously compromised on land, right? So invariably, for a second strike, robust, viable second strike capability, it has to come from the sea. And from the sea, it has to come from the submarine. And from the submarine launched ballistic missile. So you have a submarine launched ballistic missile, which will also carry MIRVs, right? And you won't know where that submarine is. These submarines will be nuclear powered submarines. They can remain underwater for as long as 8 months. Okay, and therefore you will not know where it is. And for him to now neutralize your submarine capability is almost impossible. And that gives you the second strike capability. That is why we talk about triad. Have you all heard the term triad? So there are three legs of nuclear capabilities. One is launch from the ground, that is land version. The other one is to launch from aircraft, which is the air version. The third is the launch from the sea, which is submarine, which is the underwater version, right? All three put together, you call it as a triad. Triad is three legs. So your second strike capability is feasible only when you have a triad. India has a triad right now. Okay? The Arihant. Sudarshan Chakra is an air defense missile system. We are talking about ballistic missiles and nuclear missiles.
But it integrates the
No, that's a different topic altogether. That's an air defense issue. Okay. All right. So, along with that, countries will also now take on the concepts of no first use. We follow no first use in our doctrine. You develop your doctrine, and your doctrine can be based on first use or no first use. Pakistan says, I'm always threatened by India, so I'm not going to do a no first use. The moment I feel very threatened on my survivability, I'll launch. So Pakistan believes in the first use of nuclear missiles. Chinese, right from the beginning, I told you, Mao Zedong said nuclear weapons are paper tigers, not meant to be used. It is not a weapon of war. And therefore, we will develop to create deterrence, but we will not we will not be the first one to fire a nuclear weapon. Because they have an NFE policy, which they have now modified to say, if there is a threat from a nuclear weapon state, I don't have to follow the NFE. Right? So this is an ambiguity they are creating now. Right? But India has an NFU very clearly. So when you have an NFU, you have to assure yourself a second strike capability, and you have to have enough capability to be able to impose unacceptable damage on the advisory, the guy who's launched attack on you. Okay, that becomes the minimum credible deterrence. Right? A minimum credible deterrence are not fixed. It will vary from time to time based on technology and the capability other side develops. Right? So it is not a fixed number, but it is a capability. Right? You should be able to impose unacceptable damage to the other side. Right? That's the way it is to be done. Okay, so the weapons consist now of various technologies that involve MIRV, ballistic capability, cruise missile capability, hypersonic capability, and then you have those translated into various missile systems. ICBM is an intercontinental ballistic missile. That means it has a range of about 12,000 to 20,000 kilometers range. The Chinese have just displayed in their military parade 20,000 kilometer range weapon, right? They also have a weapon system which can actually go around the earth fully, remain in space, and then it becomes launch a glide warhead, which that means you are actually fooling the enemy's air defense system constantly because you're not letting them to know where you're going to come from, correct? And that's a technology development. Okay, cruise missiles and bombs are air delivered, submarine launched ballistic missiles, and these all will have to be backed up by ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. That today largely comes from space, right? There is a 24/7 monitoring of space. Ever since the nuclear age started, now both sides want to know where their nuclear silos are placed, where their nuclear capability main centers are located. So they wanted to fly over each other and do that, right? So because of the space capability, now they would launch satellites. And somebody would say, you're flying over me, I'll shoot you down if you have had the capability. So they agreed upon each other, saying that peaceful overfly, which is actually about satellite, is possible, and they agreed. There was a treaty that was signed. The treaty has been also abrogated by the Americans now. Okay. But on the other hand, there were no missiles if an aircraft could fly, let's say, at 60,000 feet, and then carry cameras and fly and monitor, record everything, come back and land, and you assess that. That was happening as well. So have you all heard a name called Gary Powers? Who was Gary Powers? U-2. Have you heard of a aircraft named U-2? Have you heard SR-71? Okay. In the peak of Cold War, I told you the Americans wanted to monitor and do the surveillance. So they had a glider-like aircraft that was developed. It will get launched, reach 60,000 feet, and fly across the Soviet Union into land in a friendly aircraft subsequently. Where was it launched from? Peshawar. That's where Pakistan was. This is in the peak of the Cold War. So he would go from Peshawar, fly over the Soviet Union at 60,000 feet. They had no missiles reaching 60,000 feet. And his very powerful cameras, he would film everything, land in Finland. And from Finland, they'll take the films, do the analysis, and they would do monitoring of Soviet bases and other things everywhere. Okay, so this is what he was doing repeatedly for a couple of years. Till the Soviets finally got their missile that could now break the 60,000 feet barrier, and they shot him down. So he came down by the parachute, took him prisoner, and then he was a prisoner for more than 10 years or 15 years in Soviet Union. And then they did a prisoner exchange with one of their guys, and then that's how it is. So 60,000 feet, U-2 was no more safe, and therefore they developed another aircraft, SR-71, very powerful engines, twin engines. It looks like a rocket, would fly at 100,000 feet and at a speed of 3 times the speed of sound, 3.5 Mach. So there was no missile easily that could catch it. No missile would reach 100,000 feet. Today you have even that is possible. You can do that, but they were quite safe. So they fly all over. But now I think they've reduced because missiles have caught up now. In 1980s, Reagan administration started a program called Star Wars, primarily to now look at the locations of ballistic missile launches and kill them at the initial phase itself through laser weapons. So you will position your strong laser-based satellites in near Earth orbits and track these and then kill them. That was it's like a ballistic missile defense. But it was very expensive. It was a science fantasy, right? So they poured in a lot of money, but a lot of technologies got developed. It was scrapped by late 80s or early 90s. But all those technologies have now come into the BMD, what's known as the ballistic missile defense. It is still being tested. Practical nuclear weapons are for battlefield usage, right? In the theater, now once a war breaks out, it is possible to use a tactical nuclear weapon which can destroy an armored formation, which can destroy your soldiers. But nuclear weapon is still nuclear weapon. So whether you use a tactical nuclear weapon or you use a megaton weapon, the other country will respond with a nuclear weapon. So it is an ambiguous issue. That led to a development of using depleted uranium, which they did in big way in Iraq. And that still has a lot of damage to the people, on the children and everybody else. Okay, in terms of radiation. Dirty bomb is what today any good physicist and chemistry background, strong research guys, if he's in Al-Qaeda, he can get the materials, put together and make some kind of a nuclear weapon. That is the fear. And they call it as a dirty bomb that can actually work. But the whole system has been so well controlled that it's actually difficult. Okay, so along with that, you need to look at biological and chemical weapons as well. Because when you talk about weapons of mass destruction, then you need to correlate with the combination of WMD. All right? And therefore, what all has happened? In 75, we brought in the ban through the Biological Weapons Convention. We brought in a ban outlawing the biological weapons, right? In 97, you brought the chemical weapons ban. And along with that, you brought in the fissile material cutoff treaty as well. So these are all the mechanisms that now addresses the nuclear security aspect of it. Okay. And along with that, these are of course not related to the nuclear this thing, but these are all a process, banning the anti-personnel mines or landmines. Then cluster munitions, guys are still using cluster munitions. You would have read in the paper in Iraq. I mean in Iraq. But that was in 2010. And then, of course, they restart the nuclear weapons ban negotiations. And that starts off again in 2017. It's now come to a stage where the nuclear weapons need to be banned. 2/3 of the world agree on it. But the Security Council and people who already have nuclear weapons, they are not party to it. They don't want to talk about it. Okay, so that's where we stand. But the total ban on nuclear weapons is a treaty that's been agreed by majority of the members of the General Assembly. It's now opened up for signature. And 50 states sign it. They've signed it in 2020. It triggers the entry into force of the treaty, right? And the treaty now makes what's known as nuclear weapons is illegal in warfare and illegal under international law. There was a case that was taken up with the International Court of Justice. If a country's existence has an existential crisis and wants to use the nuclear weapon, then will it fall under this one? They refuse to address the problem. They've left it open. So this will give some moral happiness for some people, but in actual practice, nothing much has changed. Okay. Okay, arms control is part of this entire process. So what all is the issues in terms of tools for enforcing non-proliferation? Okay, so the NPT I've spoken about. Deepest flaw in that is the nuclear haves and nuclear have-nots. Then along with that, they brought in no nuclear weapons can be delivered if you don't have a delivery mechanism, right? And that is missiles is one of the important components. So they brought in the missile technology control regime. Are we member of the MTCR? What does the MTCR do? Any missile that's above 300 kilometers range cannot be sold to countries that can possibly proliferate. Okay, so India suffered on one of these issues with respect to cryogenic engine space launch vehicle in 1993 and agreement with the Russians. And since we are not part of the MTCR, the Russians were forced to withdraw. Okay, but today we are part of the MTCR thanks to the nuclear deal with the US in 2007. In 2008, we became members of the MTCR. Nuclear Suppliers Group, they do what's known as the forensic research and track all the nuclear materials across the world, right? So that is how they make sure that they do the inspection, they track the material exports from various countries. And this group is largely the countries that possess the technology and the capability in processing those materials as well. It's a group of 48 countries. And here, India was supposed to be inducted as a member. And two countries kept objecting to it. One is China, which is the other country. Pakistan is not a member of the NSG. US wanted us in. Correct? But out of 48, two countries kept objecting. One is China, the other one was New Zealand. Okay, New Zealand. Right? Now, why is that out of 48, 46 are okay? We still couldn't become an NSG. Why is that? Member of the NSG? Because the NSG laws say you have to have an unanimous acceptance. So even if one member objects, you cannot get in. Right? And that's where we stand. Wassenaar arrangement. Have you heard this term? Wassenaar arrangement? Okay, it's another agreement amongst nations which controls largely conventional weapons, including delivery mechanisms. Okay, dual-use technologies, these exports are controlled. The Australia group deals with chemical and biological weapons, right? And then, of course, we have the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, I'm sure you all would be quite familiar with what's happened in Iran and what's happening in Iran with this issue, correct? So, in terms of control, you can see how the arsenals have evolved from 1950 when the nuclear race started off, and this is a peak, 61,682. When the INF Treaty was signed in 87, this was a holding of nuclear weapons in the world. Okay, we could have destroyed Earth many times over with this weapons. Then we've started reducing it now, and START is another arms strategic talks on arms reduction treaty. All right, START 1 and START 2. Also, that also puts a focus on reducing your ballistic missiles and longer range weapons and other weapons. So we've started reducing it. So today we've come to less than 10,000. And now there is a talk of starting the new START. Russia has a maximum and followed by the US. China has about 500 warheads or 600 warheads as of the latest one. And China now has changed their philosophy, and they now are modernizing their nuclear weapons, warheads, and they by 2030 they're expected to have about 1,000 warheads, which will be more or less similar to what the US has. Right, Pakistan has about close to 200, 180 or so. We also have something similar, and Israel, I told you, has about 200. North Korea probably will have about 50 or 70 or whatever it is. Right. These are the different dimensions of the non-proliferation aspect. That actually this has been brought out when, at the peak of their unipolar hegemony, the US proposed this, how they would go about controlling and checking out, get the freedom to check anyone, inspect anyone for, the weapons of mass destruction under a scheme called Proliferation Security Initiative. India didn't agree to it, so did many other countries. So this has fallen through. Okay, this is one of the other export control regimes are, now I've explained all of this. So you have under weapons of mass destruction, NPT, biological warfare, weapons convention, the chemical weapons convention, Australia group, nuclear suppliers group, MTCR, Wasana arrangement. These are all the schemes that actually, along with that, you put in now nuclear free zones, which I've explained to you, right? All those maroon colored ones are nuclear free zones. And the objective is to increase these nuclear free zones and keep narrowing down the weapons who would have. But that's a difficult task. What we are seeing is probably it will go even more. 9 will increase to 16 over the next 30-year time frame. So in terms of testing, pretty much nobody tests now. We've come to a capability where, a situation where we don't need to test effectively. But that doesn't mean people are not testing and modernizing. Well, technology today is advanced so much that you can do a lab testing effectively and keep modernizing your warheads and miniaturizing your warheads. And therefore, what has enabled all that development process is also these treaties, starting off from a partial test ban treaty, NPT and CTBT. Okay, so we've pushed people to minimize the physical testing that is required. So the proliferation risks are, as indicated here, it's horizontal, vertical, and also non-state actors. It's only a matter of time you have, like one of these Al Qaeda guys was a very well educated scientist actually, and even with very simple capabilities available, they are able to put together drones, etc. So it's a matter of time this may happen, and that's the biggest threat that everybody is concerned about. But more important is in the entire nuclear weapons safety issue, command and control, double checks, and what's known as they have a system called permissive action links. It's a key system, and multiple redundancy is given in terms of safety. But with the kind of cybersecurity threats that are emerging today, it's a bigger threat as well, right? So they're conscious of that. Okay. The NPT issues I've already explained, so I'll rush through this part. These are all the data that's given here. All that is what I covered here as these slides. These are the holdings as of today. The UK has 225, France has 290, Israel as per this is 90, by some other information is 200. The US 3,700, including those that have been retired and on reserve. Similarly, Russia is 4,299. North Korea is 50 and China is 600, as I said this. Okay, now what about India and Pakistan? So our nuclear warheads in aircraft capabilities, these are all, they're not official statements. They're all estimates by some various scholars. So this is by CIPRI, which is a Stockholm-based research institute. So India is 48, Pakistan is 36. Land-based nuclear missiles, India is 80 and Pakistan has more, 126. We have the third leg of the triad and the submarine, that is 16. They are 0. And then, of course, other stored warheads, 28 and 8. We follow a strategy of what is known as a recessed strategy. Recessed is you never keep any nuclear warhead ready to be launched next minute. They're all separated now. So only when there is a very clear direction, command and control mechanism that comes in, they are put together. And they're all distributed very intelligently to have the least chance of anyone interfering with. Okay. Okay. Now the rivalry is all about, how each country has pursued from research to partnerships to alliances, and for a variety of reasons why each one goes along in a certain path. Very obvious reasons, we went through the triad route. So we want all three legs. Pakistan, for their limitation, they're heavily dependent on China. And because of the first use policy, they're also focused on tactical nuclear weapons, which we haven't at least officially announced that part. But Pakistan, there's something called nuclear strategic signaling. You keep giving out statements to send a message and a signal to the other side that this is a capability I've got, and don't push beyond this line. So Asim Munir making a statement from White House is a part of that strategy, saying that if you push me, yes, you hit us in Sindhu, but if you push us beyond, then I will use nuclear weapons. This is the message he's giving, correct? So that is part and parcel of the overall this thing. But all that comes under what's known as an escalation ladder. So nuclear matrix, escalation matrix is something countries have to be conscious of. And in the Sindur, we did the escalation control extremely well, right? The other part is to bring peace is the confidence building measures and other issues. Let's come to Iran. What happened in Iran? It's a member of the NPT. Why hasn't it withdrawn when it's facing so many problems? One of you will answer that question subsequently. Okay. Okay. So because it's part of the NPT, it is heavily, imposed by inspections, IAEA inspections. What do the inspections do? You have nuclear reactors as your nuclear power plants, correct? You have your fuel rods that go into, doing the work. And those fuel rods are enriched up to 3 to 5%. That is enough for a nuclear power plant. For a weapons grade, you need to enrich it to 90%. Correct? We are talking about U-235, right? From a normal ore. Okay, so the IAEA now looks at how many rods, where are you getting those rods from, how is it used, what is the residue, where does the residue go, what is the waste, how do you recycle the residue and reuse it, all that is tracked. Correct? That is where the inspection is there. But if the IAEA also plays a dirty game in geopolitics because they are controlled largely by the Western powers and say, no, this guy is close to, he's not opening out something for us, he's close to enriching to 90%, then the US puts the pressure on them. Right? And that is what they're accusing the IAEA of. All right. Now, how many of you are aware of the Stuxnet attack? The first time they built a lot of centrifuge capability in the first stage. And in 2008, the centrifuge capability was destroyed. How was it destroyed? Have you heard this cyber attack, Stuxnet? Okay, the Israelis and Americans joined hands together. It was a Siemens system that they were working with. They penetrated through a Siemens engineer's laptop. They injected a virus. That virus, when you now plug the laptop for a regular maintenance into the system, it moved in, lay dormant for 6 months, observing how the centrifuge works, and then got into it at the right time because this is all defined when it will get activated. And then as the centrifuge works, it will gradually pick up the speed and then reduce the speed, and continuously it will work for a few more months like that. And at some point of time, it will build the centrifuge and keep accelerating to a speed beyond its permissible limits, and then break up the whole centrifuge system. Okay, so this is a virus attack. Therefore, the ambiguity comes in. A virus attack, is it, or a cyber attack on a critical facility like your nuclear power plant? Will that constitute an act of war? Is something we will have to, the world is debating, we'll have to look at that. Now, JCPOA, after 2008, when Obama had come in, then they got the 5+1, that is the security members, 5 security members plus Germany, because Germany were the main technology suppliers, and they crafted this treaty where inspections will take place. They will not move enrichment beyond 20% or something, and then they will remain within limits. What is JCPOA? Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Okay. So now this was scrapped by Trump in his first term. So he actually broke the deal. The Iranians were not at fault. Okay. But unfortunately, there is another element that is part of this. Now they've gone into the, they've built more centrifuges. Now Israel is attacked, the US is attacked, and all that. Now JCPOA is being renegotiated. But along with that, they're not addressing Iran's major concerns. But there are three countries which are UK, France, and Germany, part of the 5+1, who have the freedom to take up the issue in the UN Security Council or General Assembly and lodge an action to impose sanctions on Iran all over again, or more sanctions on Iran. They're under sanctions anyway, right? That's called the snapback clause. That is a clause that's built in. And there are no discussions, no voting in the UN General Assembly. So that snapback has already been activated. 30 days time, that 30 days finishes on September 30th. And what will happen? So now Iran now will have to take a call. Walk out of the NPT, pair with the Russians and Chinese, and go explicitly nuclear, saying it is mandatory for our national security. That's what North Korea did. Right? Same thing, this is a trick. So what will happen? They will get problems in sanctions with the European nations and this, but as far as their capabilities and technology are concerned, today alternates are available. But it is for Iran. Despite all these problems, for years together, Iran joined the nuclear non-proliferation treaty during the Shah's regime, one of the earliest countries to join it. The Islamic regime has maintained that, right? But for a strange reason, they continue to stick to that, despite all the problems that they face. So this is that time.
Why did Russia support sanction?
Russia hasn't supported sanctions. I mean, in the earlier stage, they have. Right now, they are maintaining a neutral position because they are upset that the Iranians have not sealed their strategic partnership with more stronger military cooperation. That element is not there in the partnership. Okay. Iran's nuclear program current status, I've already explained, so we can rush through this part. These are the locations where you need a heavy water plant. That capability is necessary for enrichment to weapons grade requirements. Otherwise, light water reactors can do the job for your power plants. And they've built very strong places. The Fordo and Natanz were the areas that were attacked. Isfahan as well. Bushehr is a nuclear power plant which is operated by the Russians in a big way. And that is when Russians warned Israel not to touch there because 200 of their experts are working there as well. The way they evolved in developing the enrichment capability, there is a significant history to it. The military is not in aligned with the religious leadership. The religious leadership is not in favor of going nuclear, but the military wants to go nuclear. So after this war, it is generally perceived that the Iranian Revolutionary Guards will be more powerful. And if this person who's the leader now, Khamenei, goes off, they probably will assume power and they will take the decision on the nuclear issue. Even if they take the decision on now, the supreme authority, the religious authority may not have much of a say given what has happened in the past, correct? So they may go along with it. So that is the issue. But the fear is that if Iran withdraws and goes nuclear, the West is not worried about Iran because that's already a gone case, but they're more worried about Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and the Gulf countries. And now that the Pakistanis and Saudis have signed this deal, this is going to be a tricky issue for them. Okay. Okay. North Korean strategic capability. Again, they joined the NPT earlier, and then they've seen that they're not getting the kind of an assurance that they should get. They were being pressured on more inspection and opening up all their capabilities. So in 2003, they withdrew, and then they developed their capabilities in terms of ballistic missiles. They did the nuclear test in 2006. They claim they have done a thermonuclear test as well, but they've also claimed that they've got a ICBM which can reach any part of the US with a 13,000 kilometer range. Correct? So The US doesn't dare to touch North Korea simply because it's a nuclear weapon state. And that's the logic that's being given to Iran as well. Okay. Ambitions start off from the earlier days, and they have a strong technology base with the Soviet relationship in the early days. If you all go back and pull out your old newspapers, Hindus, or any of Indian newspapers in the 70s, India and North Korea, as socialist states, had very strong relationship. And every National Day of North Korea, you'll have massive newspaper advertisements in all the national newspapers, right? So they also had a fairly good level of education and standard of living in the 60s and 70s. Sanctions is what actually sort of killed them, but their science and nuclear capabilities are reasonably fine. This is a format which looks at how you actually now monitor the proliferation through various mechanisms, which I've explained to you all. Arms control agreements, now from 1970s to 2020, we are back to the starting point. We had the first one as the anti-ballistic missile treaty between the US and Soviet Union in 1972, which was scrapped in 2003. And now anti-ballistic missile treaty scrapping has led to an uncontrolled development of ballistic missile defense. The Russians say that brings in instability. The Chinese also say the same thing, right? So the strategic instability is created when some of these treaties have been scrapped. We have been to the starting point where none of these treaties now in place and effective anymore, right? It all depends now. Now, the Putin has just said, I think it came 2 days back, that he is extending for 1 more year the limitations on, as per the old treaty, correct? He's giving an option. Okay, after that, he will say everything is gone, correct? And if the new treaties, if they are working out, now these are the figures that will get affected. The US has about 2,000 warheads, and they will reduce to 1,550. The Russians have about 2,600. They will also reduce to 1,550. Not affected by the treaty are those that are in reserve and something that's waiting dismantling. Correct? But if a country decides to reverse this dismantling and refurbish that and bring it back here, you will still be limited by this active warheads. Okay, this is what is the treaties thing is required. Okay, so we finish here. If there are any questions, we can start. Yeah. Hmm?
In this week, using the nuclears, what thing is nuclears? What is?
You have to destroy them. They're all nuclear warheads, right? If I have 10,000 and let's say I'm limited to 2,000, I have to dismantle 8,000. I can have some in reserve, like they have a reserve here, right? So that leads to a lot of other complications. So where will you use the dismantled one and it becomes a nuclear waste, or it can be reused in your nuclear power plants by doing some mechanisms and here and there. Yeah.
I have heard about that. If there have been nuclear tests at the outer space level. So how it will create impact if the tests are done in the space? It is not in use now, but I'm just asking that.
They learn by the hard way because they destroyed half the satellites that were floating around at that point of time. They brought in the EMP effect on the regions where the explosion took place. And in outer space, if something is created, it doesn't die easily, right? So the radiation is a big issue. So all that will affect everyone. And today, how many satellites are flying today? Anyone? Okay, Elon Musk alone has 10,000 plus satellites floating around. Okay. Okay, so you have concepts of mini satellites, your satellite-based internet, your communications also heavily dependent on these satellites. It will be idiotic for anyone to think even of doing a nuclear test in space. So you'll destroy all that. Correct? And the rest of the world is not going to stay quiet on that. And they realized it quite quickly. So that is why they brought in very clearly no WMD in outer space. It doesn't stop militarization, but no WMD in outer space. Yeah. Anyone? Yeah, please. Okay.
Pakistan and Saudi
Yeah, it's okay. I can get it.
And according to the agreement, Saudi is soberly saying, in case Saudi is under attack by Israel, Pakistan is going to supply them with nuclear weapons. And the same is happening in the case of the Muslim NATO bloc. Now, Saudi and Pakistan are part of
And they're not NATO bloc, Muslim NATO bloc. They're thinking about it. Okay. Hmm.
and it is ready to supply nuclear weapons to Saudi.
That is our view that Pakistan is a rogue nation.
Yeah, okay.
They don't look at it that way. Yeah.
All
Which treaty? Which treaty is being disregarded? About? No, I'll explain this. Okay. Every country has a sovereign right to enter into a treaty with another sovereign country. Correct? Clearly, when they believe their existential issue is in question. Correct? Or can be threatened. So when Israel attacked Qatar, Qatar is a close ally of the US. The largest military headquarters outside of the central command is in Qatar, of the US headquarters. Right? Despite that, the US couldn't prevent Israel's attack. And it is actually a stab in the back. That is another one. So now the Gulf countries believe they cannot trust Israel in any way, but they can't trust the US either, at least under Trump. Right? And therefore, now they want a nuclear umbrella. So Saudis have now tied up with Pakistan on a nuclear umbrella. It's basically to send a message to the Israelis. But how much Pakistan will have when, let's say, the real issue comes to war, whether Pakistan will be able to provide that, overlooking the Americans, is a different question. They may, with the Chinese support, but then they'll break off with the Americans completely. The Pakistan military is heavily linked to the American military because of the traditional, partnership they've had. So the treaty anyway explicitly says, in case of an aggression against any of the countries, aggression against them, either against Pakistan or against Saudi, correct? So they will come to the assistance, including the nuclear umbrella. Now, nuclear umbrella can only be given by Pakistan because they have the missiles to cover that region, right? Now, let's take a case if there is an attack by India on Pakistan. If we are the aggressor, then the treaty kicks in. Pakistan can demand Saudis to support them, and Saudis can only support them through finance, weapons, buying weapons for them, and maybe some kind of a troops. Correct? So, in theory, that is possible. But if you look into history, we've never been the aggressor. It's been the other side. So if Pakistan creates a problem and we respond to it like we've done in Oxendu for Pahalgam, Saudi has no business to come to the aid of Pakistan. They will not do that. And our relations with Saudi is equally good as well. That will not happen.
What happens? If Balochistan, we have a problem.
Hmm.
Will they do the blame on us, saying that we are the ones who create it?
No, internal problems, they can keep blaming each other, but that's not going to. It is about the attack that first comes.
It is not a you say that you are supporting Balochi people. How will you?
There is no explicit evidence. You see, everything has to be in international law, has to be proven. So, have we sent material support? Have we sent men and materials to Balochistan? Moral support means nothing. It's no reason for somebody attacking you or saying that you attacked us. Morally, we can support the Balochistan revolutionary government or whatever it is. Even that we are not doing. Officially, we have not done anything at all. Correct? But if Pakistan, let's say, captures few, let's say, company of soldiers there, or few people who are facilitating their combat against Pakistani military, then Pakistan may have an evidence. But that is not there. Correct? And even if we support, we're not going to leave any evidence. So that's it.
And Tnpsc wanted to join India. Son of the Spartan. He recruited them. He taken the part of the team. They wrote it, they not complete. So incident and what for Parliament. The reason given to the Baruchi. Yeah.
But that was because the partition was facilitated by British, and we went by that agreement. So that was yeah,
Sir,
yeah.
private participation in nuclear power is risky.
Well, in the US, all nuclear power plants are run by private companies. See, this business about private and public, it's a mindset since I've dealt with it, particularly in the defense. And I think you mentioned about private sector coming in defense now. No, it was cleared in 90s itself. Okay, and I was part of the Kelka committee, and we finally pushed it. But the mindset is that public sector is our company, that is the government's company or national company. Private sector is private sector. They're making business. They're doing profit, which is wrong. The way to look at it. Everyone is contributing to the government, to the country, right? It is for the government to create adequate rules and regulations to be able to make sure they conform to the legal provisions that the government mandates. And that should be common to public as well as private sector. So if that is understood well, encourage private sector. They will do better because they'll be efficient. They'll be innovative. Public sector is lazy and inefficient. Unfortunately, that's a reality. Mm.
If nuclear is acting as a shield for the country, nuclear power and nuclear missiles.
Yeah, so I told you right in the beginning, the nuclear weapon guarantees your survivability. That means somebody who attacks you is not going to push you beyond a certain line because nobody wants to hit by a nuclear weapon straight. Correct? Even the Americans, they may have 2,000 weapons, and North Korea may have just 15 of them. But he doesn't want a nuclear weapon hitting New York or Washington. He may launch 1,000 missiles on North Korea and maybe obliterating North Korea completely. But the Americans will not accept even one bomb falling. Forget about nuclear weapon. One bomb falling on Washington and New York. That's the way it works. Yeah. Hmm. No, no, we need to understand that it's got nuclear power really doesn't have anything to do with nuclear weapons. Okay, like I said, nuclear power is a nuclear reactor that needs uranium, enriched uranium to the extent of 3 to 5% only. Correct? That is, you need to get the U-235 into that enrichment. And in some new technologies, you may need up to 20%, but the weapons need 90%. So the weapons grade enrichment is a different setup by itself for you to develop. But to set up your power plants, this is what is required. So a power plant is a clean energy. Today, technology is developed so well that you don't need anymore the 2000 megawatts or 1500 megawatts Kudangalam kind of plants anymore. You're getting what's known as the modular nuclear power plants, which can be enough for a small city, even for a rural region, which will develop the regional requirement. And it is very, very safe. Right? Second, we have a lot of thorium. And the thorium can be processed into a 360-degree cycle in which it produces uranium, plutonium, comes back as thorium, so that the nuclear waste, which is a big problem in the past technology, because where do they put the nuclear waste? Into concrete shelter under the sea. It still radiates. It is radioactive for 1,000 years or 1,500 years or 2,000 years, correct? It is still damaging the environment and the water and everything. So that is minimized with the new technologies. So the world is moving towards the concept of modular nuclear reactors, which is very small, very easily can be set up in different parts of your country, very safe, and will probably give you clean energy. Correct? That's fine. When you want to address the weapons issue, then you're going to have a research reactor like Trombay you have, Kalpakkam you have. You can separate out that facility for enriching your material, uranium and the plutonium, to the requirement that you want. So when we signed the nuclear deal, they wanted us to open up everything. But they said, no, we are a nuclear weapon state. So those areas which you declare as military or defense-related nuclear power stations, where this enrichment can be there, they are not open to inspections. But Kudangalam can be open to inspections of IAEA. So that is the agreement we have. So the requirement to develop nuclear energy is a larger objective. More and more countries should be allowed to access, export, modular power plants, build nuclear power plants, but have the safeguards so that they don't take away the fuel rods and put it in a separate enrichment facility. That is what they suspect of Iran doing it. But we are tracking every bit of material. But if I have an enrichment facility for my weapons grade capability, and I source my raw material entirely on my own, then nobody can track you. I have the uranium deposits. I mine that and I put it into my specialist research facility, centrifuge facility. I develop my weapons grade uranium. Correct? So that's a separate part. But international cooperation can take place. It must happen. And given the environment and climatology issues, I think nuclear energy is far more cleaner, better for the earth. We need to go on that way.
Nuclear energy, we are talking very important. That's why in totally the future, the energy, the power energy they will produce mostly through plutonium reactor, which is complex. The two things which will be the source of energy in future only hydrogen, or is plutonium. So this will all go behind uranium bombs, destruction. Then we will go for positive use of plutonium, which is much more is.
After the Chernobyl accident, some countries were shutting down the nuclear power program. What is the status now?
No, so they are the old technology. Chernobyl was built in 70s. It melted down in 86, if I'm right. I've been to that place. Okay, I went in 2016. That area is still barricaded. We are not allowed to go into that prohibited area because the kind of damage that's taken place. The core melted down, correct? And that then led to what happens? It's a chain reaction. So in a nuclear power unit, you're controlling the chain reaction, correct? But when something melts down, the chain reaction now takes off. It's uncontrolled, and therefore, the disaster that happens in Fukushima in Japan that happened. The technology was far more advanced. Again, people have a wrong impression. Yes, it led to something, but it had inbuilt mechanism to quickly shut down. Correct, and it shut down. Despite that, some damage took place. Now, these are all big reactors. Now, France, for example, at one point of time, 80% of its electricity of France comes from nuclear power. 80%. How much is ours? Anyone? In our electrical consumption, 70. Nuclear power. 20 is very high. We are at 5%. Not even 5. We've been wanting to reach 5 and 6 for a long time. 20 years, we've not reached there, is it? Right? But France from 1960s had 80% of their power from nuclear energy. Right? And where were they getting there? Because West Africa was under French control. From Niger, they were taking for pittance and giving them nothing. Correct. That's why all those revolutions happened. Those guys have get through the French out. But the French have also started when the problem against nuclear power plants rose and Germany virtually removed. They're regretting it now. The French downsized to 60%. But they're now wanting to build back. Because new technologies have come, they'll do that. But smaller countries, particularly countries that don't have adequate hydroelectric resources, now nobody wants to use coal. Then these modular nuclear plants and modernized nuclear plants is the solution. That's what you.
In 1955, first international program nuclear was launched by Nagar.
Bhagwash, yes, sir.
That's right. Very interestingly, the secretary of the first Bhagwash conference was Ashok Paswani. His father was a former finance minister. Here, very important part was played by You know of Nagar Puri, and who wrote the book on Vedic mathematics, Arctic data. He was also playing an important. So all the what you call how people, peaceful people, has he's in the end, innovative thing, he said, that is how about with peace. So otherwise we'll go into pieces. So but the peace is the purpose of the learning. In course of time, we will all these things will disappear and will teach it growing.
Any other questions? Anyone?
So
Yeah.
what do you think is the best solution in ongoing tensions in the Gulf countries? Take the Iran issue or Israel issue. What do you think will be the best solution or what will happen in the future? According to your point
It'll
of view?
depend on the US and Israel. Straightforward. Okay, so the Israelis don't want, they want to be the dominant power. And of course, this Netanyahu idiot has to be thrown out because that Zion is an extreme Zionist guy. 80% of Israelis, that when I visited them, and that time they would openly say, we are all secular, we're not part of this very religious fanatics. But now they have taken control and they've convinced 50% of the population. So 70% or 60% by one survey are all in Netanyahu's mindset. So that's a serious problem. And the Americans, because of the Jewish businesses being dominant, they have a problem as well. So there are a lot of protests from common people, but I think that's already building up in a big way. So at some point of time, the US will back off and then they'll have to do something.
Also correct.
No, again, I think you see, I don't buy any of those narratives. Hamas, as UN Secretary General said, did not happen in vacuum. It's a 70, 80-year-old story because Israel, we must understand, is a settler colony. These guys who are Netanyahu and company, they are East Europeans. Most of them are converted Jews. The original Jews are Arab Jews who lived there. They never had problems with the local guys. Right? These guys have come and vitiated the entire process. Okay? And they wanted to settle the colony or settle a nation is one. The US is a settler nation. You take away the people from the original owners of the land, the indigenous people, and then you say, this is my nation state, and you get away, or you slaughter them. Okay, this has been the colonial and imperial enterprise. And this is the last outpost of the imperial enterprise, brought forward by the British, Balfour Declaration. And that is why you see the French, because the problem that happened to Jews during the Nazi period, the Europeans should have settled the Jews within Europe. They didn't want Jews there. And they happily said, okay, here's some Palestine being made available, throw them out there. Correct? Now they're making that happen. So that's, and the surprising thing is, if you go to Israel, those guys will call themselves as Europeans rather than Palestinians from an Arab land. That's what they prefer to call. Okay. So that is the issue.
One of the interviews, he was asked a question. Question was asked, whom do you consider as the worst enemy of the Jews? Whether they are Russian or the Hitlerian Nazi, other country. And Ben Gurion said, none of them are real enemies of Israel. The real enemy of Israel is Moses. How? He said, when the whole country full of oil was available, crude oil. He also discussed all the way to a Muslim country in
Which have nothing.
there is no oil.
Hmm.
So he said,
Yeah, got something. Anyone else?
okay, Ganesh.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Here, again, Ben Gurion.
Thank you, sir.
No, I will tell you later.
Thank you, sir, for this enlightening session and for sharing your valuable insights and experience with us. Now I request Sri Ramodaran, sir, Director of Chinmaya Academy for the Services, to present a moment to our chief guest, Dr. Matheswaran. On behalf of Chinmaya Academy for Civil Services, I feel deeply honored to propose the vote of thanks. First and foremost, I extend my heartfelt gratitude to our chief guest, Dr. Matheswaran sir, for gracing the occasion with your presence and sharing such inspiring thoughts. I sincerely thank our director, Sri Damodaran sir, and Ramon sir, who are guiding light of our academy, to be with us today and encouraging us with your valuable support. I would also like to thank the participants from offline and online who have active involvement made this program lively and meaningful. With that, I once again thank each and everyone for being this part of this event of this wonderful occasion. Thank you.
ॐ पूर्णमद पूर्णमिदं पूर्णात् पूर्णमुदच्यते पूर्णस्य पूर्णमादाय पूर्णमेवावशिष्यते ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः हरिः ॐ श्रीगुरुभ्यो नमः हरिः ॐ Thank you.
If you have any further question, you can tell me. You can press.
Thank you. All the best to you all.
Tournament meeting.
Single. Single.
Okay.